What does the narrative that music is a universal language mean? This means that everyone understands it across the world, right? This narrative is saying that everyone can understand and relate to music, which is a really narrow understanding of what music actually is, right? Regardless of whether it's rap, K-pop, country, classical, etc., the many diverse and vastly different types of music reflects the culture of where it came from and how it was formed. To say that music is a universal language is saying that people can understand any type of music just because it's music. For example, we don't consider German a universal language because it's only one of the many languages used in the world, right? Someone from Korea may not understand the German language, but we don't think of this as something that is bad, right? Just different. So just like we don't consider country music a universal language. So there are so many different types of music stemming from the culture, and each uniquely special genre slash type of music reflects its origin and should not all be grouped into one big lump and viewed as universal. So let's look at the counterfactual. What would society look like if music was not viewed as a universal language? Firstly, we would have greater cultural identity, right? Without the narrative that music is a universal language, society would likely place greater emphasis on the distinctiveness of their musical tradition. This will lead to a richer celebration of cultural identities where local music is more cherished and better preserved. Secondly, we would have a greater appreciation of diversity. So instead of seeking a one-size-fits-all interpretation, listeners would approach music with an understanding of its actual meanings, right? Whether that means searching up the language or figuring out the figurative language of that music, right? This shifts the focus onto learning and appreciating this specific context. Thirdly, we would shift in musical education. Yes.
So if local music is cherished and cared for, doesn't that foster division?
Even we think that if even if it fosters division, it's fine because we're saying that each type of music is like uniquely different, right? That's not a bad thing. So thirdly, there would be a shift in musical education, and rather than teaching music as a universal phenomenon, children can explore and understand the historical and social narratives behind behind different genres and styles of music. So fourthly, we would also have a more understandings on contextual collaboration. Now that collaborative projects between artists from different backgrounds are becoming more nuanced and contextualized rather than baseless and empty, there can also be a decrease in the potential for misinterpretation of musical. No, thank you. So moving on to our first argument, let's talk about cultural specificity. So, Judge, music is not a universal language and it never will be. So music is deeply rooted within cultural contexts with different styles, meanings, and with emotional expressions that vary widely across different societies and communities, right? So what resonates in one culture may completely alienate another. For instance, consider the contrast between Western music, Asian music, and African music. Each has different unique scales, styles, rhythms, and cultural significance that are not universally understood or appreciated. Right? This cultural specificity makes it so that music cannot transcend barriers as the notion of a universal language implies. So what is the impact of this? Right, so by recognizing the fact that music has like cultural differences, it'll be unable on our side to appreciate the role in identity and community. It fosters a deeper understanding of cultural differences rather than assuming that music is a commonality that overlooks all these distinctions, right? So what is the implication? So promoting the notion that music is a universal language may lead to cultural appropriation as well as dilution of cultural identities. So as diverse musical traditions can be homogenized under a misguided notion of universality, we believe that this narrative of music being universal is wrong. So moving on to our second argument, what do we mean by misinterpretation? Judge, we mean that emotional misinterpretation can take place on the other side, right? Emotional responses to music are extremely subjective and influenced by personal experiences, backgrounds, etc., right? Making interpretations of musical pieces highly varies. For example, a piece of music can evoke feelings of joy in one listener, but evoke a sense of annoyance or anger in another, right? This happens a lot, and this variability clearly showcases that music cannot effectively communicate in a universal emotional language, as the intent of the composer will not always align with every listener's interpretation, right? Or thought of the music that they can produce. So what is the impact of this, right? So this emotional interpretation can lead to understandings within cross-cultural communication, right? For instance, a song that was intended to convey hope may be perceived as melancholic in a different context. So songs can lose meaning and they already do, right? This complicates relationships and dialogues between the different cultures as well as between artists and the audience. So why exactly is this bad? So this means that the intent of the music that was created will be lost, right? On our this would not happen on our side, since we would be able to appreciate the differences between the music and actually acknowledge that music can be different and it doesn't have to be universal to be appreciated, right? So what is the implication of this? If we continue to assert this ideology that music is universally understood, like side opposition, we risk oversimplifying the complexities of emotional communication, right? On the other side, ultimately, the genuine intercultural connections will be undermined. To summarize, we achieve things that side opposition cannot. We place cultural specificity. We place cultural differences of music, create better emotional interpretation, and our second speaker will tell you about the linguistic influence. So music is deeply embedded in cultural contexts with styles, meanings, and emotional expressions varying significantly across societies, right? So what resonates in one culture will be offensive in at least one other culture, right? If not considered vulgar or unacceptable. Emotional responses also to music are subjective and influenced by personal experiences and cultural background. So a piece intended to convey a specific emotion that can evoke entirely different feelings in listeners from different cultures, illustrating that music cannot effectively communicate through borders, let alone universally, right? So overall, we're saying that music can be appreciated with their differences culturally, and we can do this better on our side because we would be able to appreciate the cultural differences and prevent misinterpretation. So proud to propose.
Four layers of framing coming from opening opposition. A, what's our counterfactual? I think that we embrace how language is a universal language under our side. B, what does this music actually show under our side? It shows that music, it doesn't have a lot of barriers that actually prevent people from listening to music. That is, everyone has access to it and they're exposed to it from a very young age, right? And people are also not restricted from listening to such kinds of musics. So, but thirdly, societal. I think the side government has the burden to state what would be the replacement of music under their board and how that would actually hold necessarily more practical benefits, despite music having minimal boundaries and help cultural fusion, right? They need to prove why their alternative is actually better under their case, which I think opening a government failed to do. I think that we are the team that wins because we actually connect people through music and we actually prove why this is better for A, improving the quality of music, but B, also improving how we actually connect people together. But fourthly, I think that music is considered a universal language by a lot of artists, by Mozart, right? But not only these artists, scientists nowadays, they even conduct research to actually prove this statement. So now one rebuttal before I move on to my two arguments. So will there actually be misrepresentation like opening government states? I think that misrepresentation, it doesn't really happen when these people can actually understand the mood or the tone of the song, right? I think that people, they can clearly interpret these songs better because they're exposed to it from a very young age. I'm sure that I can actually interpret like this song that's in a different language because I'm exposed to these tones and moods in music from a very young age. I think that open government is being really uncharitable because they assume that people, they don't really know music that well, and their entire case is based on this one assumption. So now two arguments on firstly, why is music a universal language? I think that music has minimal boundaries, right? This is a characterization of music. I think that everyone, they can just listen to music and understand this attitude. For example, if there's dramatic music in a movie, then they can actually see that it's going to be like building up tension, but they can see that if it's actually going to be a scary movie. But beyond language barriers, I think that music, it's a universal language because everyone can understand it and see what it implies. For example, K-pop is popular in the US even with lyrics because people, they just listen to it for the mood, or they just listen to it for like the culture, like for the vibes, right? So, but I also think that emotions are a shared language. this is a universal language because even if you're black and I'm like white, right, we can both feel anger, suspense, and sadness from a song. Languages also have subjective connotations. The way that you say things are perceived differently by others. I think the connotation of words, whether they are positive or negative, are perceived differently, and that is why there's so many misunderstandings and miscommunications in the status quo. Comparatively, if you hear a fast beat, then you know it's exciting. If you hear a low like beat and a rumbling sound, then you will know it's suspense or horror. I think that these are natural things, natural instincts, and innate listening to the characteristics of humans. So, but also on language barriers, I think that you can be like you can like not be intelligent and still understand music because you still understand the beat because you're like exposed to it from a very young age, right? Requirements are natural human instincts and ears. Not lastly, and also I want to talk about division. I think the division is not fine because that means communities are divided when you have more discrimination and hate, right? Especially towards minorities. This is a strategic flaw for government to say division is actually okay, right? I think that's why like opening government, they can't even win even if their web proves like the best like metric, right? So B, how music is actually accepting towards different cultures. I think that music, they support different cultural fusions, right? For example, like Bruno Mars and Rose Apathy, right? We said that without music, you think the authors or movies or directors collaborate like that in the first place. I told you I'll take Chapiores. I think that music is lenient towards culture because that is the trend that it has created, where K-pop or J-pop or country music is all global because it's a universal language. There's more accessibility and less cultural divisions under our side. So lastly, on strategic implications, I think that we proved to you why music is actually a factually and a universal language. We win this debate because we prove the narrative is not really harmful, since it's true. It's wrong for government to stymie a narrative that's actually factual. The following argument will prove to you why this narrative is actually beneficial in the first place. I'll take your POI.
So why do you think that division is bad? Like division doesn't mean hatred. Division means that we're acknowledging the differences and saying it's okay.
Okay, but what you characterize division as is saying that division is not fine because I think that this means that communities are divided, right? And when I already told you that this means the communities are divided, and this leads to having more hate and discrimination. So even if your original purpose might just be like separating these communities, I think that in the long run it still leads to even more like hate and discrimination and ostracization, right? Especially towards the minorities. I think this is a strategic flaw from your side, right? So now, second argument on how this narrative encourages people to actually listen to music and be more open to music that is not from their culture. I think this narrative says that music is a universal language, so we should be more open to all forms of music. For example, in extremely conservative white towns, I think that people are still listening to other racist musics like black pop, hip hop, or even things like K-pop. So I think that music eventually trickles down, it transcends to cultural boundaries because it's all about the beats, right? The instruments and the music sounds and dynamics, not necessarily just about the lyrics or where it was produced. So I think that ultimately people have better access to cultures from other countries and that's exclusive to music, right? This is an exclusive point coming from OO because we proved to you that music actually has multiple components that actually bring better things. But B, this narrative also encourages people to understand that the human condition of emotions like empathy, compassion, human suffering are all things that we try to discuss. I think that this actually connects people better because when music shows emotion, then a person will listen to it and they might be able to relate to it because everyone goes through emotions, right? I think that we also connect people better through emotions, but also on minorities. I think that under this narrative, it's easier for minorities to convey their points and earn money from their songs because it's something that even the majority can understand, right? Minorities' grievances like police brutality or discrimination can be conveyed better. So on impacts, firstly on problem analysis, I think that society is divided into social hierarchy where the rich and poor gaps still exist. Black white communities are divided, and developed and developing countries are divided. So this brings communities together under our model, and by having everyone listen to music and communicate through music, you're able to unite communities and at least have some form of similarities that people can relate to, right? We also help minority communities earn money because majorities, they can also understand this as well, right? Minority artists have money and they can earn money as well because it's easier to earn money when music is a universal language. Therefore, we are more than proud to oppose.
Judge, I will start off with the rebuttals, right? First of all, the opposition side claims that the government side has a burden of proving what our alternative to music is and how it will be better than the other side, right? Okay, so I will prove this burden right now as the DPM. First of all, we tell you that we can instead push visual art. Paintings, sculptures, and photography can convey emotions and ideas across cultures through imagery while not creating wars between different musical fans and other nations, right? Now, visual art often also transcends language barriers by using symbols, representations that resonate universally instead of depending for each country. And this allows for an interpretation based on personal and cultural experiences that will not end up with one side being offended. Now, another alternative would be storytelling, right? Oral traditions and literature have already proved that it serves as a powerful means of sharing experiences as well as values cross borders. Through stories, individuals are able to connect with others by sharing cultural narratives, moral lessons, and personal experiences, fostering empathy and better understanding, leaving no room for false interpretation with accurate translations, right? So not only that, there are so many other things such as multimedia art, contemporary dance, and whatever you want to speak through. Now, the opposition side also claimed that music has unlimited boundaries, which we do not believe in at all, right? Because first of all, we would like to tell you that the emotional responses that are elicited by music are extremely subjective and can vary significantly between individuals from different cultures, different backgrounds, different like generations, and also with genre variations, different genres have distinct conventions and fan bases. While crossing genre collaborations exist, music is much more limited than you may think. I will take the first POI.
Okay, so how are these alternatives that are found on your side mutually exclusive?
Okay, so we told you that this is mutually exclusive because these achieve things that music itself cannot. So we never said that we want to like completely abolish music, right? We will still have a culture which listens to music casually. But instead of proving like music to be a commonly universal language, we could say that paintings, storytelling could be like universal languages, so that on our case, there will be at least no cultures that are offended or misinterpreted, and there will be less like cultural appropriation, whatever. Now, the other side also claimed that tones are easy to understand even with language barriers. So while we do agree that it's true to a certain degree that musical tones can convey emotions universally sometimes, the interpretation of those tones can vary widely across cultures and languages because different musical traditions often have unique scales, rhythms, and tonalities that carry specific meanings within their context. For instance, a minor key evokes a sadness in Western music, but in another culture, it will do the complete opposite. It might not have the same emotional weight or could even be associated with joy, right? So additionally, we would like to moreover tell you that the context in which music is presented, such as accompanying lyrics, cultural practices, and social settings, will and commonly do significantly influence how tones are understood. Therefore, while the emotional impact of music can be broadly accessible, the nuances of its meaning can be deeply rooted in cultural and linguistic contexts that not everyone can understand. Now, with that being said, I would like to move on to our case's third and last argument. So now we would like to tell you, Judge, that the essence of music itself often lies in its lyrics, which is about So now our third argument is about linguistic influence on like musical understanding and comprehension. So, Judge, we as opening government would like to tell you that the essence of music itself often lies in its lyrics, right? That is how musicians communicate with their audience. This carries very specific meanings that can only be fully grasped within the linguistic and cultural context from which they originate. Lyrics often contain nuances such as idiomatic expressions, like cultural references, emotional connotations, and like other figurative forms of speech that are deeply tied to the language itself in which they are written and sung in. For example, a song in English will use colloquial phrases or cultural allusions that resonate with only with those who are familiar with the English-speaking culture and language. While that can be translated, these lyrics often lose their original purpose, their meaning, and their message, as well as the depth, leading to much misinterpretation, which is not the purpose of art. This disparity underscores the notion that music cannot effectively function as a universal language, right? Rather, it is a complex interplay of sound and languages that require understanding both elements to fully appreciate and understand the work. Now, moving on to the impact of this case. This reliance on language for understanding music has significant implications for how we engage with and appreciate musical traditions around the world as a community and society. If we accept that music is not a universal language, instead, we become more attuned to the intricacies of different musical forms and the specific messages that they convey, right, Judge? This is where things become exclusive. This awareness can lead to richer, more meaningful interactions with music, even across borders, as listeners are more likely to explore the cultural context of songs rather than assuming a shared emotional experience. Now, furthermore, recognizing that lyrics can be written with culturally specific meanings, I will take that later, allows us to engage more respectfully with diverse musical traditions. It emphasizes the importance of cultural sensitivity in appreciating and discussing music. Thereby, we as open and government prove why fostering a more inclusive environment for musical exploration is only possible on our side. I will take that POI.
Why would people have the incentive to investigate the music you're talking about when they don't relate and don't have the norm to actually give them more of an incentive to actually do so?
Okay, so I don't believe that the intentions really matter, right? If some people want to actually research music because music matters a lot to them, because it is such a universal language like you want to propose, we believe that it is possible that people are going to research whatever this is. And this is also why we would not want to push this as a universal language, right? Because if something needs to be researched to be fully understood, it should not be assumed in the first place. Now, the implications of acknowledging music's linguistic limitations extend to a lot of sectors. It includes media, cultural exchange, and so much more, right? So in music education, for example, curriculums should shift to emphasize the study of lyrics within their cultural context rather than however people want to interpret it. Encouraging these students to learn about the social, historical, and emotional layers of songs and whatever music people produce would be so much better for society as a whole. Now, moving on to our comparative. When comparing a world where music is seen as a universal language in comparison to where it is not, the benefits of the latter becomes much clearer, right? Because in a world that considers music to be a universal language, the listeners and audience overlook the rich the meaning embedded within specific cultural contexts. This can lead to superficial interpretations and people homogenizing musical experiences where unique traditions are diluted to fit a perceived universal appeal, especially the Western, right? So now in contrast, a world that rejects the notion of music as a universal language allows rather for a celebration of diversity, which is why we believe that differentiating these two cultures are very important. Thank you.
4 layers of framing coming from opening opposition. A, what's our counterfactual? I think that we embrace how language is a universal language under our side. B, what does this music actually show under our side? It shows that music, it doesn't have a lot of barriers that actually prevent people from listening to music. That is, everyone has access to it and they're exposed to it from a very young age, right? And people are also not restricted from listening to such kinds of musics. But thirdly, I think the side government has the burden to state what would be the replacement of music under their world and how that would actually hold necessarily more practical benefits despite music having minimal boundaries and help cultural fusion, right? They need to prove why their alternative is actually better under their case, which I think opening up government failed to do. I think that we are the team that wins because we actually connect people through music and we actually prove why this is better for A, improving the quality of music, but B, also improving how we actually connect people together. But fourthly, I think that music is considered a universal language by a lot of artists, by Mozart, right? But not only these artists, scientists nowadays, they even conduct research to actually prove this statement. So now one rebuttal before I move on to my 2 arguments. So will there actually be misrepresentation opening government states? I think that misrepresentation, it doesn't really happen when these people can actually understand the mood or the tone of the song, right? I think that people, they can clearly interpret these songs better because they're exposed to it from a very young age. I'm sure that I can actually interpret this song that's in a different language because I'm exposed to these tones and moods in music for a very young age. I think that open government is being really uncharitable because they assume that people, they don't really know music that well, and their entire case is based on this one assumption. So now 2 arguments on firstly, why is music a universal language? I think that music has minimal boundaries, right? This is a characterization of music. I think that everyone, they can just listen to music and understand this attitude. For example, if there's dramatic music in a movie, then they can actually see that it's going to be building up tension, or they can see that if it's actually going to be a scary movie. But beyond language barriers, I think that music, it's a universal language because everyone can understand it and see what it implies. For example, K-pop is popular in the US even with lyrics because people, they just listen to it for the mood, or they just listen to it for the culture, for the vibes, right? So, but I also think that emotions are a shared language. this is a universal language because even if you're Black and I'm like white, right, we can both feel anger, suspense, and sadness from a song. Languages also have subjective connotations. The way that you say things are perceived differently by others. I think the connotation of words, whether they are positive or negative, are perceived differently, and that is why there's so many misunderstandings and miscommunications in the status quo. Comparatively, if you hear a fast beat, then you know it's exciting. If you hear a low beat and a rumbling sound, then you will know it's suspense or horror. I think that these are natural things, natural instincts, and innate listening to the characteristics of humans. So, but also on language barriers, I think that you can be you can not be intelligent and still understand music because you still understand the beat because you're exposed to it from a very young age, right? Requirements are natural human instincts and ears. Lastly, and also I want to talk about division. I think that division is not fine because that means communities are divided when you have more discrimination and hate, right? Especially towards minorities. This is a strategic flaw for government to say division is actually okay, right? I think that that's why opening government, they can't even win even if their web proves the best metric, right? So B, how music is actually accepting towards different cultures. I think that music, they support different cultural fusions, right? For example, Bruno Mars and Rose Apathy, right? We said that without music, you think the authors or movies or directors actually collaborate like that in the first place. I told you I'll take Chapios. I think that music is leaning in towards culture because that is the trend that it has created, where K-pop or J-pop or country music is all global because it's a universal language. There's more accessibility and less cultural divisions under our side. So lastly, on strategic implications, I think that we proved to you why music is actually a factually a universal language. We win this debate because we prove the narrative is not really harmful, since it's true. It's wrong for government to stymie a narrative that's actually factual. The following argument will prove to you why this narrative is actually beneficial in the first place. I'll take your POI.
So why do you think that division is bad? Division doesn't mean hatred. Division means that we're acknowledging the differences and saying it's okay.
Okay, but what you characterize division as is saying that, oh, division is not fine because I think that this means that communities are divided, right? And when I already told you that this means the communities are divided, and this leads to having more hate and discrimination. So even if your original purpose might just be separating these communities, I think that in the long run, it still leads to even more hate and discrimination and ostracization, right? Especially towards the minorities. I think this is a strategic flaw from your side, right? So now, second argument on how this narrative encourages people to actually listen to music and be more open to music that is not from their culture. I think this narrative says that music is a universal language, so we should be more open to all forms of music. For example, in extremely conservative white towns, I think that people are still listening to other racist musics like black pop, hip hop, or even things like K-pop. So I think that music eventually it trickles down, it transcends to cultural boundaries because it's all about the beats, right? The instruments and the music sounds and dynamics, not necessarily just about the lyrics or where it was produced. So I think that ultimately people have better access to cultures from other countries and that's exclusive to music, right? This is an exclusive point coming from OO because we proved to you that music actually has multiple components that actually bring better things. But B, this narrative also encourages people to understand that the human condition of emotions like empathy, compassion, human suffering are all things that we try to discuss. I think that this actually connects people better because when music shows emotion, then a person will listen to it and they might be able to relate to it because everyone goes through emotions, right? I think that we also connect people better through emotions, but also on minorities. I think that under this narrative, it's easier for minorities to convey their points and earn money from their songs because it's something that even the majority can understand, right? Minorities' grievances like police brutality or discrimination can be conveyed better. So on impacts, firstly on problem analysis, I think that society is divided into social hierarchy where the rich and poor gaps still exist. Black white communities are divided, and developed and developed countries are divided. So this brings communities together under our model, and by having everyone listen to music and communicate through music, you're able to unite communities and at least have some form of similarities that people can relate to, right? We also help minority communities earn money because majorities, they can also understand this as well, right? Minority artists have money and they can earn money as well because it's easier to earn money when music is a universal language. Therefore, we are more than proud to oppose.
No representation is better than misrepresentation. It doesn't matter if people think that they know the deeper meaning behind cultural forms of music, if that so-called perception is inaccurate to begin with. So proud to propose. Before anything then, what is the main metric of this debate? This debate should be solely about preserving the unique beauty of music. The inherent nature of music is that it can be perceived and appreciated in different ways, and that benefit should not be undermined, especially because it is unique to music. The whole point of universal language is that everyone reaches a consensus on the same interpretation and same understanding. English is sometimes seen as a universal language because a lot of people understand it in the same way. Forms of art cannot be filtered under this narrative. That is where we cross the line. Art is art, and let's not forget that. Moving on to some responses then, team by team, and starting with OG. Their main contribution is the point about cultural significance and how that cannot be undermined by a universal understanding. We completely agree that it's important not to oversimplify cultural and indigenous music forms, and we'll extend on this in our first extension. But here's where OG goes a little wrong. PM says that some people might perceive the wrong meaning from a certain song, thus taking away from the intended feelings or emotions that the artist tried to convey, and that is a bad thing. We would actually take this point and say that it's a good thing. Although some songs are made to convey personal feelings or perhaps story from the artist, the true beauty of music is that people can interpret different ways from that. But I think OG kind of forgets about this point, and they actually try to argue against that. On top of this, OG cannot win this debate because of their counterfactual. They prefer a world where most emotions and feelings are conveyed through visual arts like paintings and sculptures and whatnot. But I think this counterfactual basically boxes them out of this debate because we're literally debating about music. But moreover, OG never proves the comparative benefits behind their world. Let's talk about this counterfactual based on what OG thinks to be the best metric of this debate. OG's only path of winning is through the lens of what form of art will allow people to properly understand the feelings that the original author tried to convey. But if this is OG's main line of logic, they had to prove why visual arts actually fulfill that. Because at the end of the day, aren't paintings and sculptures also complicated as well? And aren't people also confused about what a piece of artwork is supposed to convey? These pieces of artworks are not necessarily black and white about what the artist is trying to convey. I think OG kind of shoots itself in the foot trying to push this ambitious counterfactual without properly backing it up, while proving this is comparatively better than what they argue and than what they respond to OO about. Moving on to OO then, their main contribution is that everyone understands music the same way, and that can get rid of language barriers and whatnot. The main problem with this case is that they oversimplify music itself. We are not debating on the soundtracks of horror movies, but we are debating on the plethora of the various forms of music, which is different per genre, per language, and so much more. Furthermore, OO is just entirely incorrect to say that everyone can understand music. If you hear the music from an entirely different country and an entirely different culture, it's unlikely that you would actually understand what the music is about. But that being said, this is, again, not necessarily a bad thing. It is okay not to understand the meaning behind certain songs, and there's no problem with that. But just because people of diverse backgrounds don't understand each other's music does not mean that the immediate solution is to immediately oversimplify everything and say that it's all the same and that it's all one universal language. Moving on to our first extension then about how this leads to the misconception of minority cultures, but why this is especially significant. And I'll talk about our difference from OG later. Premise here is that contrary to OO's logic, we think that this narrative would actually keep people's understandings of unfamiliar forms of music superficial, and there's no incentive or reason for them to learn more about this. OG's characterization of the narrative is entirely correct, that people will not truly understand music, but instead think that they do. But here's where we would completely differentiate ourselves from OG. OG makes it sound like not being able to understand global forms of music with different cultures is not a good thing, but as CG, we would argue and push for the narrative that music is a language that not everybody can understand. This is our counterfactual, essentially, but that's okay, and it's okay to not be able to understand the cultural significance or details behind these forms of music. Oversimplification, however, is not the answer either. That being said, let's go deeper into the consequences of misconceptions that OG misses out on. People will form misconceptions, that much OG gets that far, but let's keep going. Note that this is especially bad because emphasizing a superior narrative that the world generally accepts, because after all, the entire point of a universal language is that there's one interpretation that everyone reaches a consensus on, ends up marginalizing the voices and interpretations that come from the very underrepresented communities that made this music. The key takeaway from this argument then is that not understanding the meaning behind a form of music is significantly better in the consequences that I talked about, better than forming a misconception about it. So no representation is better than misrepresentation. Before moving on, I'll take the POI.
Yeah, so what do you think the counterfactual would look like?
Our counterfactual would basically be a world where instead of the narrative that music is a universal language and everyone is able to understand it the same way, it's basically a narrative, right? Where music is something that is hard to understand the same way the author thought of it, but that is okay. And we would want to be more inclusive towards people thinking of different perceptions about music. But great timing. Our second extension is that this enforces the narrative that everyone has to perceive the music the same way for there to be a uniform understanding and connection. When this music is framed as universal, it implies that there is one singular way to appreciate it or understand it. This leads to the notion that everyone across the globe that there is one emotion or message in any piece of music, and additionally one way to interpret it. Why is this principally wrong? People live in different social contexts, are surrounded by different individuals, have different influences, and live in different environments. When we expect the same understanding from a form of music, then this pressures individuals to align their understanding with more dominant narratives about music, and they feel pressured and discouraged in some ways to be able to bring and embrace their own understanding of these forms of music. Therefore, if music is viewed as universally understood, discussions around it and discussions around music become immensely oversimplified, and the complexity of musical meaning and the nuances of how different people relate to the same music can be overlooked, which heavily limits deeper conversations about the same artistic expressions and emotional resonance. That also means people can form personal connections with music and how that fits with their personal life. But because obviously that's different for each different person, and that basically goes against the whole notion of having a universal understanding, you prevent these healthy discussions and healthy discourse about music from happening. This notion suggests that the specific emotional responses to music, like joy or sadness, should be very much uniformly experienced, overlooking the nuanced ways individuals understand and react to music, which is heavily based upon the individual experiences that they had. The narrative often neglects the non-musical elements and how they interplay into the music's meaning, the historical, social, cultural, religious context that exists within a deeper layer of the music. Music that is powerful in a specific setting is because of the context that is inherent to that setting and how in another setting it may have little to no impact in another. Already from the first speech on CG, we already take home the significance of oversimplifying music while also bringing in a unique view on the interpretation of music. For all this, so proud to propose.
Judge, opening teams lose this debate because they all fail to engage with the counterfactual properly. OG claims that people will just view music differently and increase diversity. OO's claims people will group together and are bonded through music. I think the problem with both cases is they overlook the Western music, they overlook the fact that Western music will simply crowd out the industry when you don't actually have these forms of representation and this sort of idea that music is universal. Thus, so proud to be on CO. I'm going to do 5 things for you in this speech. First of all, engagement with OG. Second of all, engagement with CG. Third of all, reframing. Fourth of all, an extension on diversity in the music industry. And fifthly, weighing and comparison with OO. First of all, under engagement with OG then, they basically give us 2 main pushes. First of all, there will be a greater understanding of music as being diverse, and they're going to see each piece of music as culturally different. I think this claim was contingent on the fact that people will actually see these forms of music. I think the fact is people are just far less likely to see the music industry in the first place, apart from those of their own country, because they're just far less open towards other other forms of music, because of the fact that music is not something that is universally represented together. Second push was to say that division is good because people will appreciate the differences. I think it's simply untrue and uncharitable. The whole reason we have racism is because people couldn't appreciate differences. I think this is likely to be very similar with music. It is also the fact why many Western producers are just far bigger than those from marginalized groups, right? People, when music is not said to be universal, are just not going to believe that they understand the music. They don't feel the music is made for them, and they just don't view the pieces of music as relevant enough. Now onto some engagement with CG. CG says the metrics to win is that it should be based on who can preserve music. I think the simple way we win on this metric is because we prove to you why the music industry is simply not going to get crowded out by the Western Western half of the music industry when everyone is still willing to listen to these forms of international pieces of music. In terms of the claim about, no thank you, I'll take you later. In terms of their claim, which is about misrepresentation in music, I thought the counterfactual, as they specify, it would just simply be no music from these minority groups because Western music crowds out the industry, because we just have a higher population in the Western industry, and because there are just more resources to create music in the Western industry. You simply just have more Western pieces of music, and more people are just going to be listening to Western music and not listening to other forms of music. I'll take that POY now.
It's 5:30.
I'll take that POY.
Okay, so if someone is racist, aren't they going to be racist whether people don't dilute these cultures or not?
Wait, could you please repeat that, Soa?
Okay, so if someone is to be racist, are they not going to be racist whether people don't dilute these cultures or not?
I think the reason for racism is usually because they don't have enough representation, and just the fact that they aren't like told enough and they're not open-minded enough. They don't feel like cultures are meant to be open-minded, so they're just far less likely to be as open-minded. So it would tell you, just like in terms of the music spectrum, then it would just be far better on our side because we actually like increase the representation and dilution. So yes, in response to your POI, dilution would probably be the best solution. Now onto some reframing. Note we are going to be counting this as part of our extension because none of this material was brought up at OO. First of all, what does this norm actually look like? I think opening has a weird idea about what this is. We thought it just actually looked like music not being able to appeal to everyone. It does not have to be from the same culture, same language, and can appeal to everyone's emotions nonetheless. And this norm emphasizes how music is unique and connect us on a human level and the emotional impact and power. What was the music industry in the status quo? We thought there was lots of like diversity, and when it was seen as universal language, it was easier for rising stars to succeed regardless of the culture. What the music industry is likely to look like in the counterfactual would just be it's very heavily Western dominated. It's easier for Western rising stars, and there's just a lack of diversity for the reasons that people are scared to post because they feel they're not going to get the representation, and people are just not willing to listen to these forms of music. Now onto my extension, which is about diversity in the music industry. I'm going to specifically prove why this is not derivative from OO. Under this point, 4 things. First of all, what does the music industry look like in our world and a comparison to the counterfactual? Second of all, why these benefits are exclusive? Third of all, why diversity is important? And fourthly, the impact. What does the music industry look like in our world compared to the counterfactual? We thought in our world it was far more inclusive because there is no narrative that music is universal. We oppose OG's characterization that people simply view music as a whole, culturally different. We do not think that people simply look out at other music because they do not believe it is simply universal. In our world, we specifically make music viewed as a universal thing. That meant people were more open, and that meant people thought music pieces from other cultures was actually relevant to them, and it did not matter whether or not it was from a different culture. Government's world is far more likely to be filled with Western cultured music. It's going to squash out and crowd out small creators from other smaller countries not part of the Western half. Why are these benefits so exclusive then? I thought government must concede, first of all, that music is not universal in their world. When people don't view things as universal, people simply just don't watch it as much. When it is said to be a universal language, people think it is relevant and are far more likely to investigate it. They're more familiar with their own culture, and they just genuinely have no idea about other things. Like, people stick with their family styles. Others are just not understandable, and it feels like they won't fully understand it, and they're less likely to understand it. We thought being universal makes it more relatable to people, and people just don't care about the fact it is not made from their own culture and not made directly at them. And I thought there was just likely a larger focus on the concept rather than the lyrics. Similar to art, which is considered universal, people are far more open to different artworks. But when it comes to languages, people are less open towards other cultures and learning about other people's languages. Why is diversity so important? Diversity just meant minority groups, vulnerable stakeholders, and people from smaller countries are far more likely to get to produce music because they know they're going to get representation. What were the impacts? People are just far more likely to look at the lyrics in their work rather than the concept or mood, smaller artists and creators get more attention and people are more willing to listen. What was the weighing? I thought we filled in the framing gaps that opening couldn't do, and our point on more diversity just had properly explained counterfactual. Judge, over I told you at the end of this speech, I basically proved to you I wink over government reframing and extension. So proud to.
There are three primary wrongs in today's debate. A, when people understand music differently, that takes away the author's original meaning, and that's bad. B, people shouldn't understand music differently because there's one meaning, and that's right. C, when you listen to marginalized music, it's going to be overshadowed in the music market by Western music, each coming from OG, OO, and CO respectively. Straight onto my team's two clashes with integrated rebuttals. On the first clash, on how this impacts individuals and their perception of music. Let's look at what each bank gives you and take down their case. For OG, the main takeaway here is that when somebody interprets the music in a specific way that is different from dominant or superior narratives that rule mainstream media, it is bad. Essentially, they imply that while music is not universal, there's a different understanding that universal conform are bad. The primary reason why this is wrong is because any form of art, especially music, is inherently subjective, and each listener will bring their own experiences, emotions, and cultural backgrounds into that interpretation itself, meaning that when dismissing these alternative interpretations undermines the essence of this artistic expression, which is based on the personal connection and the individual meaning, and every listener has the right to interpret the music in the way they want and the way that resonates with them, and labeling alternative interpretations as bad discourages this personal expression and creativity, ensuring that people don't want to listen to music. As for OO, the main turning point in which OO is completely boxed out of this debate is when they fail to consider how individuals are impacted. Individuals on OO have to face the oversimplified narrative of music when people cannot form their individual connections because what may be understood and appreciated in one culture might be completely foreign in another. But that goes as far as to say that that is okay, but unifying the whole range of interpretations into one is a whole nother level of oversimplification. Last, what does CO give you? It's clear that they are boxed out of the debate when individuals on their comparative have to conform to one form of understanding, because even if Western music does overrule the marginalized and the indigenous form of music that's there, the problem that CO mainly has is that on both worlds, Western music is still favored. I'll take that POI later. However, when people try new forms of music from the marginalized groups and there's no narrative conforming them to understand the music in this one specific way, they will be open to making interpretations and trying new marginalized music. But when there's a constant narrative and some form of structure or pressure for them to understand the music in this specific way, they will not be open to listening to marginalized groups' music. Yes, what's your POI?
So can you respond to our characterization on how music is based on universal themes like love, so it's a universal language?
Even if music is understood with one universal theme, that doesn't remove the fact that oversimplifies the narrative of music, because people understand music in different ways. Even if it's about love, there are many branches to love, and people form individual connections with that theme love, and they can't simply be like, oh, this is a love song. There are different connections that they make because of their personal experiences, and it's not okay to oversimplify everything. But that goes as far as to say it's still okay, but it's okay to make different interpretations from the author's original intentions or from the mainstream interpretation, but it's not okay to bring a whole nother range of interpretations. Now, let's move on to our team's second clash on which team better preserves the original meaning of music and the essence of music itself. As for OG, note how they never clearly resolve the long list of problems they give us, because they never provide a clear mechanism as to why these do not exist on their side, nor do they give us the concrete counterfactual that is relevant to the context of the debate. Solely if their response to such issues posed in the debate is to convey emotions through visual art, whether they be sculptures or actual paintings, they are immediately boxed out because they never account for musicians, those who enjoy art through music, and other impacted stakeholders, and they never explain why these harms that are put on the table don't exist for visual art, and hence this completely boxes them out of the debate because they never even bother to preserve the essence of music. What does OO tell you? This narrative can lead to a one-size-fits-all approach to musical appreciation, promoting mainstream genres as the benchmark for quality and emotional resonance, while sidelining the more experimental or less conventional marginalized music that we're talking about in this debate today that may not conform to these expectations. And hence individual experiences and emotions, because they shape how each person connects with music, I'll take that POI later, different life histories can lead to vastly different interpretations, meaning that a song might resonate profoundly with one person while leaving the other indifferent. Yes, what's your POI?
So even if people understand music in different ways, we told you that it's marginal because themes are still universal. Prove why it's not marginal.
Even if themes are the same, there are multiple branches to the theme that exist where people connect their personal experience because everyone lives life in a different way. They connect those smaller bits of their life and connect it with the music. And when that connection is formed, everybody connects it in a different way. And when the musician created the music and when person A and person B listens to the music, they understand the music and connect it differently. Whereas on your comparative, you're oversimplifying it to one narrative because the artist or everybody experiences in the same way. And that's the universal way of understanding the music. Hence, what does finally OO give us as a contribution? While it's okay not to understand the universal theme of music, it doesn't mean we can conform everyone into one narrative and call it universal because people can't understand it. Individuals may respond to the same piece in the fundamentally different ways, and claiming that everyone can understand music in the same way disregards the subjective nature of emotional responses and the unique ways individuals process feelings, and hence it's safe to conclude that OO fails to preserve the core essence of music. Finally, CO and what is their main case line? They claim that Western music will overshadow the marginalized group's music. When music is considered as a universal platform of music and communication, why will Western music undoubtedly overshadow marginalized groups' music, and why is that the case? On both worlds, it's clear that Western music dominates mainstream media. However, when people try new forms of music from the marginalized groups, there's no narrative conforming them to understand the music in one specific particular way, and they'll be open to trying out new marginalized groups music or make it open to making interpretations. They also say that racism is worse on our side because the public thinks that the cultural music is irrelevant to their lives. Racism is only worsened on CO. Note that my MG already told you the narrative that music is universal only exacerbates stereotypes and misconceptions made about this so-called music. So whatever so-called representation exists on CO is essentially the same as misrepresentation. People think of it as a uniform perception of music that they've never heard of before and they move on. There's no discussion and no debate. That's being said, this point from CO actually works the other way around. The music of different and marginalized communities would probably be crowded out if we don't have the same productive discourse and discussion about this music. If everyone reached a consensus about the meaning about some indigenous culture's music, then they would have all moved on and reached the same conclusion, and is there nothing more to know about the music. The entire second extension coming up from my member was that the personal connections and perceptions of unfamiliar music forms lead to more discussions about people that conceive different perceptions. This leads to the more attention and spotlight on these marginalized communities because there's a unique and beautiful form of music, and note that this entire extension was just not responded by CO. For these reasons, so proud to propose.
All things are doing this speech, first just on our extension, second why we waited over our opening team, third why we waited over OG, and fourth why we waited over CG. First on an extension, what did we tell you? We gave you an extension on rising artists in the music industry, and we explained that these people were vulnerable because these artists were unlikely to have that much success on our side of the house. This extension was completely unique because opening focused on the general public. We broadened the scope of the debate by focusing on the artists and the music industry in general. We gave you an extension on artists and creators, particularly rising artists who are especially vulnerable and less likely to succeed. We also filled in the framing gaps that opening could not do. Our plan on more diversity had a properly explained counterfactual, new mechanisms, impacts that were much more important, and the fact that diversity was going to exist was just very important. We also gave you a series on new framing that opening just failed to mention. We told you that right now the music industry is very Western dominated for a few reasons, because the Western industry, more Western countries basically just own the music industry. Majority of stars did have their profession, grow up in these areas and had the necessary training to become a star. And the reason with this is because in the past there was just more resources, more professionals, and bigger studios. They own most of the large music streaming platforms, and therefore they just have more control over the industry. And I think the main responses we had to this was just that it's like the Western industry is dominated, and it's like that's going to mean that when in the counterfactual, like lesser known artists are just going to succeed more. I think this wasn't enough to just get rid of all the mechanisms we told you at CO. We tell you also music is universal. It makes people feel that a lot of the time music is universal. What that does, it makes people feel that other forms of music is relevant. They feel that they will understand other forms of music, and artists feel that is something they can and should be participating in. I think when you don't, I think in fact, what like CG just told you about how like the music industry is going to have more diversity is just wrong. Because when you don't have this thing that music is universal and that people can enjoy music without fully understanding the lyrics, then it's just unlikely that they will put this in. Because these creators will probably be thinking, because people don't appeal to these languages, because it's not in English or something, they're just less likely to put it in. Because right now, what we're promoting, what our counterfactual was to say that people were able to look past the language and look past of the things that are there and appreciate the emotional impact it had and the other things disregarding the language. I thought that was something much more important. Okay. So the other thing that CEO says that people just be more open if things are labeled universal. We think universal meant that people would actually think it is relevant, and that's why I think we took the debate. Next thing on why we went over opening. Opening's main claim to you was it's going to connect people. I tell you that this is not as important because the simple fact is when you're able to have more people in the more diversity in the studios, more diversity in in the music industry, it was just better. Reason I'll take you later. The reason that more diversity was better and only achieved on our side was because you got more awareness about these cultures, more awareness about their heritage, and that was overall better. Yeah, I'll take you now.
Under your side, shouldn't it not matter if music is popular? Because if the music industry is already westernized, will your side not just dilute the culture with countries attempting to make their music more popular in the US?
Okay, I think the reason I think having cultural diversity is an important thing. It is important for smaller countries to appeal to the wider public and show them more about their culture. I think it is an important thing for them to be able to just show more about their culture and for people to become more educated about this. I don't think that was able to be achieved on your side, as I repeatedly told you earlier. Moving on to OG. OG's claim to you was it's going to differentiate culture, and the essence of music lies in its lyrics. Few responses here. I think it was bad when the essence of music lies in its lyrics because it meant there was less support. I think what happened was people, when you have music as a universal subject, what happens is people are more open. They find that they look past the lyrics and look more at the instruments or the way it was structured, something that was different, something that was unique, and a different style of music. But when you only focus on the lyrics, what happens is you see that this is different, you find it harder to relate, and therefore there's just less awareness and less discussion in general. I think this was a very bad thing. The second thing they told you is it can just this awareness can be spread through other forms of media. It was just unclear about other types of media were not subject to the things that OG tries to prove to you that is bad for media. In fact, we tell you following OG's line of logic, these would all be subject, all sorts of media would be subject to all their harms, to the harms of things like division and less diversity. I think it all exists with other forms of media. So when you just got rid of this concept that music is universal, I think it also had just as a result, it had a harm on the countries and the spread of awareness in general. Moving on to CG, they told you a few main things. They told you it preserves music and it's bad to form misconceptions. Because a lot of the time, the things that the musicians intend to get a vocal response from, people respond to differently because they have different experiences. I think the thing to say here is this is not something that no one knows. Musicians probably did know this when they were making music, and also I just told you it's very unlikely. Sure, you form misconceptions, but I don't see why this is not exclusive. You'll always form misconceptions on music.
Sure,
you might hear something, no thank you. You might hear song, and then you might have a different conception to it than other people. I don't see why it was a bad thing to have different conceptions unless your conception was so horribly bad that you were going to start you're going to start putting in lots of hate, and I think that was just very unlikely because music communicates emotions. That's the thing we were pushing today. It is unlikely to make misconceptions about these things. We also tell you there's just a rise in media and music education. If they hear something different, unique or different, they're more likely to actually be curious and investigate and then form conclusions. Therefore, I think it was just very unlikely that claim was true. Also, we just told you that we simply outweighed this team. Because the thing is, we proved to you, right, it was so important for smaller artists, local artists, and rising artists to be able to rise up there in the industry, to promote their dreams, to show people about what they believe, their culture, and the things that they celebrated, their traditions. I think it was something you could only achieve on outside because music was something so popular in the world, something people really cared about, and something that was widely engaged with. That's why I think we win this debate. So at the end of this speech, what have I proved? First, I proved to you why our extension was the most important thing. Second, we've given you a series of new rebuttal that explains why opposition's claims were probably just mitigated or just untrue. And thirdly, we explained why we weighed over these other teams incredibly proud.